In his book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, author Yuval Noah Harari talks about the fact that we have no idea what the world is going to look like in the year 2050. He talks about the fact that we don't know what we're going to do for a living in that year. And probably the most important, we have no idea if what we're teaching kids today is going to be useful or, for that matter, even relevant to that point in time. Now, this is the kind of statement that really tickles the curiosity of educators like Anmol and I into thinking about, well, if what we're teaching them isn't useful, then what is? What should we be teaching them then? Which begs the question, well, that depends on what kind of a world are they going into? What kind of a world are they going into? Now, there's one thing we know about the future is that we really don't know anything about the future. And so if we are heading into this indeterminate future, the one thing that we do know is that we do need to make these kids adaptable. And being adaptable means being really good, fast, efficient, lifelong learners. That is a skill that kids today need to really learn and to carry with them through life. And that is the topic of our talk today. Now, if you think about learning, at least formal learning, the vehicle for all formal learning in the far past and in the foreseeable future have been schools. And therefore, it's arguable that if you wanted to teach this new skill of becoming a good lifelong learner to these kids, the one place you would teach that is in schools. Now, if there's one thing we know about schools is that for the longest time, they have been largely impervious to change. Over the centuries, over decades, we haven't really seen much more than some incremental changes that has happened. So in a system like this, which is sort of impervious to change, which is hidebound, how do you sort of start to think through how to introduce some of these changes? Based on our experience with schools, there are a few levers that we do have in our hands that we could use. First and foremost, and probably the most important of all levers, is teacher training. Training teachers to really know how to actually teach children to become good learners is probably the most important thing you could do for the system. Now, when you look at training, teacher training, it happens in two stages. There's initial training when a teacher is onboarded and she's told in no uncertain terms what is expected of her in the foreseeable future. And then there's ongoing training that happens as the academic year wears on, where that message is reinforced to a teacher. Secondly, there's mentoring, where a senior teacher or a vice principal or a principal would sit in on a teacher's class and really take in that learning experience and give that teacher feedback on what worked, but more importantly, how she could make this experience better for her learners. Last but not the least, a good rewards and recognition system that really aligns the interests of the teachers with the interests of the system. Taken together, a good teacher training system, a good mentoring system, and a good rewards and recognition system done right could really help to implement and institutionalize some of the tools that we are going to be talking about. Now that we've talked about the how, let's talk about the what. And for that, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague and fellow educator, Anmol Kumar.
Thank you so much, Vipul. Now let's see, what are some of the ways through which we can prepare our kids to become lifelong learners? First, it's important to educate and encourage them about the right and effective ways of learning. It's important to enlighten them about how they can rewire the brain so that they can understand this art of learning and hence use it to learn anything that they want. In the book, Make It Stick, the author mentions, we are poor judges of when we are learning well and when we are not. When the going is harder and slower and it doesn't feel productive, we are often drawn towards strategies that feel more fruitful, unaware that the gains from these strategies are often temporary. It's not always about putting effort that gives you a sense of satisfaction, but rather about putting effort that challenges your brain. For example, Majority of our kids would just read and reread, and they would highlight their lines in the textbook using colorful markers for revision before exams. And they look very serious. Sometimes even parents think that their kids are spending so much amount of time in studies, but yet the results are not at par with that amount of time spent. Why is that so? Reading a text without thinking gives you a sense of satisfaction, but it doesn't challenge your brain. As teachers, we need to encourage recalling. Recalling requires effort and it challenges the brain, and hence it cements learning. And most importantly, if we tell our kids, if we educate them about why recalling is better than just reading, then they can use this method to learn anything that they want at any point of time. Second, try to switch roles. Ask your students to teach you, or their peers, or maybe their parents, about what they think of a concept, about what their point of view is about something that you have recently taught them. When you teach them something, new connections start getting formed in their brain. But when they explain things, those connections get strengthened. And actually, this is an easy way for parents to understand how their kids are doing at studies. Third, very important and not so simple, art of giving feedback. An ideal feedback identifies the discrepancy and points out exactly how to fix it. Most of the feedback that we give to our students stops at identifying the discrepancy. We hardly mention how they can fix their errors. Right and timely feedback, along with right level of encouragement, can create wonders among students. And it's our duty as parents, as teachers, to do it right every time with each and every kid that we teach. There are lots of other things that we can do to prepare our kids for the future. One other example is to ask our kids, encourage them to prepare questions, frame questions, and not just solve them. Always think about building a habit that will help them in the long run, is effective, and will make them future ready. This in turn will also help us, teachers, to get aligned with the changing educational ecosystem and help our kids prepare for a future that they deserve. We are almost at the end of this talk. Thank you so much for listening to me. I would like to conclude by giving 3 important takeaways. First, drive. If you work in a school or somehow depend on others to teach lifelong learning habits, there are several opportunities to institutionalize the appropriate teaching practices. And as institutions, you should continuously drive those efforts. Second, educate. Make it a habit to educate your kids about the right and effective ways to learn. Let them learn anything, but using the methods that challenge their brain. And third, feedback. Give your kids actionable feedback with the right level of encouragement, and then you can see wonders happening. Thank you.